probably find that with Vedic astrology and this kind of basic course, even if you do it once, and even if you have more or less done your best to kind of assimilate everything and apply it as much as you can, you'd probably find that you have to go back over the basics sometimes. It's actually quite, I think, appropriate and sometimes necessary to do this kind of course maybe 2-3 times before even these very, very basic elements really all find their place. I know that some of these basic things we're going to look at today are things that, I didn't personally just read them once and then just get it and went on to apply it effortlessly from there. It was only through going back over the basics again and again that things that I actually initially thought were not really that profound or that important, really, I started to see the depth of it, And I think that's certainly the case with a lot of these things we're going to be doing. So I think you'd find that also going back over the recording periodically and sort of working through everything again from the start will be very useful. The first thing we have to confront when we're trying to or get into the calculation process of Vedic charts, and particularly, of course, for us here, generally, we're typically coming from having a background in Western astrology, and therefore, inevitably, it's this zodiac issue that's the first thing we have to confront and understand. And you might be aware that in the world of astrology, in general, this zodiac question, the tropical versus sidereal debate, it's actually quite a contentious issue, and it raises its head from time to time in astrological circles, and it often results in some pretty passionate and heated arguments. And I must say that over the years that I've been studying this stuff and involved in this stuff, I found that just when you think you really understood all of the aspects of this tropical sidereal debate, somebody brings a new angle to it, and I've found that there have been, arguments that validate the tropical zodiac that have become more impressive to me over time, and also with the sidereal zodiac. And so what we're going to be looking at here is really just the very basics. Now, quite simply, the simple essential thing to grasp is that the zodiac used in Western astrology, the tropical zodiac, is based on, or rather, shall I say, the tropical zodiac is anchored by the position of the sun at the equinoxes and the solstices. Okay, so when they say that the sun enters Aries, on the 21st of March, which is the Northern Hemisphere's vernal equinox, the sun is not entering Aries at all. In fact, where the sun is at that particular time is marking or creating or establishing where Aries is. And the sidereal zodiac is anchored to the actual visible constellations. And what we call the precession of the equinoxes is this approximately 25,000 year cycle whereby the equinoxes keep occurring slightly earlier along the constellational background every year, very, very gradually. It moves at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And so that equates to almost, very approximately, 1 minute of arc per year. Okay, so we've got the tropical zodiac, which is anchored by the equinoxes and the solstices, right? And, the reason the Tropic of Cancer is called the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn is called the Tropic of Capricorn is because those are the points where the sun has reached its furthest northern declination and furthest southern declination. And it's those points that the sun arrives at the solstices, solstice meaning sun, sol, standing still, It is those points that literally define where Cancer is located and where Capricorn is located. And I think it goes without saying, actually, that most people don't really know why the Tropic of Cancer is called the Tropic of Cancer and why the Tropic of Capricorn is called the Tropic of Capricorn, because it is literally this sort of annual cycle of the sun and these extreme northerly and southerly points that literally defines these zodiac signs. Now, when we look at the sidereal zodiac or sidereal zodiac, I get teased a bit sometimes about the way I pronounce them. What we should understand is that there is a difference between the actual zodiacal constellations on the ecliptic and the sidereal zodiac. The zodiacal constellations are only very approximately 12 equalish portions. In fact, they can vary in size actually quite significantly. And so essentially what the sidereal zodiac does is basically aligns as closely as possible with the zodiacal constellations, and it uses certain fixed stars, particularly the fixed star Spica, some people say Spica, as its anchor. And the star Spica marks like 29 degrees and some minutes of sidereal Virgo. So basically the first degree of Aries in the sidereal zodiac is the point exactly opposite the star Spica. Now, the thing is, also another thing that we have to be aware of when we're looking at the sidereal zodiac is the fact that although there's the fact that there are some slight differences of opinion on exactly where that 0 degree Aries mark lies. And the variation isn't huge for the most part, maybe within a sort of a degree or so. Now, in Vedic astrology, okay, maybe I should just bring in a new word here, and that is ayanamsha, which we'll look at in a moment. The word ayanamsha refers to the distance between or difference between the first degree of Aries in the tropical zodiac and the first degree of Aries in the sidereal zodiac. So there are slightly different theories on just what that ayanamsha is, or how wide it is. And the ayanamsha used most in Vedic astrology is known as the Lahiri ayanamsha, which, as I understand it, is an ayanamsha that was established by a certain eminent astronomer, and it's actually literally supposedly the Lahiri the ayanamsha endorsed by the government of India, but it is also the ayanamsha that most Vedic astrologers use. You see, in this diagram that I created many years ago, what you have is on the inside, you have the tropical zodiac, and then you have the sidereal zodiac, and on the outside, we have the nakshatras, or the 27 lunar mansions of Vedic astrology. What I want to show you here is that here we have got tropical 0 Aries, and there we have sidereal 0 Aries. And the ayanamsha is this difference between them. And the thing is, because of this precession of the equinoxes, because the equinoxes occur in slightly earlier along the constellations as time goes by, this is a constantly changing figure, okay, or amount. It doesn't make a huge difference over just a couple of years, but when we start looking at decades and centuries, it can become significant. It's worth knowing that for most of the 20th century, within which most people were born that are alive now, that ayanamsha was about 23 degrees and some minutes. It's now already 24, but it's although it's useful to understand how to calculate or convert Western chart to the Vedic format precisely, it's also very useful to know how to work with a more of a rule of thumb approach. So As a rule of thumb, basically you would subtract 23 odd degrees from a Western tropical chart to get the sidereal positions. But coming back to this diagram here, and how you would use it to manually draw a chart, you'll see that these spokes are actually aligned to the sidereal or sidereal sign cusps. Because, in Vedic astrology, you use whole sign houses for the most part, right? So for example, if I had to put my chart in here, my sun is in 14 degrees of tropical Libra. So I could draw that there like this, right? That would be 14 degrees Libra there in tropical terms. But if we draw a line straight through there, it shows us that it's in the sidereal sign Virgo and in Hasta Nakshatra. So this is possibly a useful diagram to refer to from time to time, especially when you're trying to get the picture of how the nakshatras fit in to the picture here and align with the sidereal zodiac. We will be dealing more in more detail with the nakshatras in a future lesson, and possibly we'll revisit this diagram then. The most important basic point I wanted to highlight here was just to make graphic for you here what the Ayanamsha is, right? And how you can see it here. All right. You'll find these figures here in that course manual, and it's giving you the precise Lahiri Ayanamsha at these 10-year intervals, right? And you'll find that if getting too pedantic about detail, you'd find that if you added an extra minute for every year, that you'd be very close. You'd be within about 1 minute of the exact Ayanamsha for a given year. Okay. And here you can see this is my chart, and on the left we've got the tropical Placidus, and on the right we've got the sidereal whole sign. And although we're going to be looking in a moment at how one draws a Vedic astrology chart in a, let's call it a more conventional, traditional way, if one is pretty new to this, it's not a bad idea perhaps to start off, at least just to make sure you've got the right chart in front of you, to use Western software and apply the Lahiri sidereal zodiac and the whole sign houses. And you can see that it goes without saying that you, although we're looking at a chart here for the very same moment, you can get some very different outcomes. You can see, for example, here that my Mercury goes from being in the 12th house there to being in the 1st house over here. The moon goes from being in the 4th to there being in the 5th. Mars goes from being in the 6th to there being in the 7th. Saturn technically here might be taken as being in the 8th, and there it's in the 9th, and so on. So you can see how Venus there goes from the 1st house to here in the 2nd house. This is one of the well, interesting and valuable things about about at least sorry, go ahead, Katrina.
Sorry, can I ask a question? So since you've done both, do you find for you personally that there's truth in both ways, or do you find that your sidereal was more accurate than the tropical?
Great. Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And it's a very good question. And well, I think the answer is sort of implied in the fact that I'm such a enthusiastic, promoter, if you like, or exponent of the sidereal whole sign approach, because there's definitely not just a case of where how I personally feel about my chart. This is also just basically looking at many, many charts over a long period of time and seeing that with very few, if any, exceptions, I found that where there is a difference between the verdict that you get in terms of house placement, between the two approaches or settings, I find that the sidereal whole sign works. But of course, this is something you'd have to decide for yourself. But I want to bring something in here. It's actually quite an important point. Okay. In Western astrology, as you know, the Placidus house system tends to be the default house system, but it is only one of many house systems that are called quadrant house systems. And these quadrant house systems, what they have in common is that basically the ascending degree marks the beginning of the first house. And the midheavens degree, the MC's degree, marks the beginning of the 10th house. And what happens here is that therefore the different houses are not of equal size. And, this might not seem to be such a big deal, or it's a bit, a problem as such. But you'd see if you look at charts for, hold on a moment. If you look, okay, I got you there, Charmaine, about that question. If you look at charts calculated for extreme northern or southern latitudes, you'll see that this offset from 90 degrees that you get from the midheaven to the ascendant can become really extreme. You can have the midheaven like right over there or right over here. And so you have three houses squashed into a very small space there, and then you have another three houses divided over a very huge space. And even Western astrologers who generally like to use the Placidus or other quadrant house systems agree that it's kind of a bit strange working with that. It just seems a little wrong somehow. Now, that's one of the things that firstly doesn't happen here with the whole sign house system. It's also true that it doesn't happen with a Western equal house system. Okay, and that's one of the virtues of the equal house system in Western astrology. But there's another point that I think is very important to note. Now, as you know, the ascendant, which marks the beginning of the first house, right, and is the eastern horizon. And one of the reasons why the ascendant is so important is because everything is rising there. The sun rises there, but also all planets emerge there. And the idea is that a planet close to the ascendant is, for that reason, something that steps forward, or so to speak, becomes something that stamps itself on one's personality in a very pronounced way. But, in most conventional Western house systems, basically, the moment a planet has peeped above the eastern horizon, right, the moment it's become visible, it's suddenly in the 12th house, which is a house of that which is hidden and a house of that which is obscure. And, some Western astrologers have intuitively sensed that this is a little bit almost like counterintuitive, you might say. It doesn't seem particularly logical that a planet that has just emerged has, in its symbolic sense, here in terms of house meanings, disappeared. Now, when you use the whole sign house system, firstly, that's one of the things that isn't a given, right? You like in if you look at my chart here, there's the actual ascending degree, 19 degrees sidereal Libra, and there's a whole lot of space above it there during which a planet is still in the first house. So this Mercury of mine, which would have been interpreted here as being in the 12th house, which means that the person's communication is kind of withheld or something like this. Here in the sidereal whole sign picture, it's that Mercury becomes very strong. In fact, it's the kind of thing that Mercury in the first house is something that tends to make for a teacher or a writer, or, a speaker or something like that. So you would definitely have been far less likely to get that impression looking at the tropical Placidus chart. But okay, I want to go back to something. I said that many Western astrologers have intuitively sensed that this is not quite right, and one of their sort of workarounds with this, which is I think a fair idea, is that if a planet is a few degrees above the ascending degree, excuse me, different astrologers might give different figures or values for this, but basically, let's say within 5 or 6, 7 degrees above the eastern horizon, they will say it is conjunct the ascendant, right? But then sometimes what they're basically saying is that, like, for example, they might have said that my Mercury is in the 12th house, but is conjunct the ascendant. So it being conjunct the ascendant is sort of a device that justifies or allows them to invoke a first house interpretation. A conjunction is in fact a first house aspect, which I won't elaborate on now, but I think you might understand why I would say that, because the two houses are in a 1-1 relationship, so to speak. So the thing is that, and you can I remember when I really was just started out studying astrology, I was reading a lot of Alan Leo, and in one of his books, I think it was called How to Judge a Nativity, there was an interesting thing that he raised there. He spoke about what he called a rising planet, and he said that if a planet is even up to 15 degrees above the eastern horizon, it could be viewed as a rising planet, and the implication there is that as a rising planet, there is a certain strength that it gains. But when you do that, you're basically robbing the 12th house of half of its domain, so to speak, because then, planets that are in this zone are sort of somewhat hidden and obscure, but sort of also powerful, and it gets a little fuzzy. Okay, so this is one of the things that the whole sign house system remedies. And I remember, early on in my astrological studies, I remember reading, again, it was Alan Leo. He said, if a planet is a little bit below the descendant or western horizon, and it might still describe the partner, because as you know, the 7th house is the house of relationships and partnerships, and a planet in the 7th house will describe the partner. And I remember him also saying that the planet that's closest to the descendant will describe the partner. And so even back when I was buying in wholesale completely to the regular Placidus house system, I always felt that Mars of mine, although technically in the 6th, was describing my relationships and partnerships and the types of people who I was attracting in relationships, right? Now, can you see then why, for me, when that Mars found itself clearly in the 7th house in the whole sign approach, it was no longer necessary to have this sort of vague overlapping of house placement interpretation, So, but this idea is most striking where we're looking at the eastern horizon, as I was saying earlier, and one of the simple mistakes that Western astrologers can avoid, is whether or not you use the whole sign house system, is be very careful of interpreting a planet that's just peeped up above the eastern horizon as being in the 12th house. And in fact, there is an alternative house system, which we might have time to discuss further down the line. I wasn't going to make much of it here, but there's a house system in Vedic astrology. I am not even sure what its proper name is. It's often referred to as the Bhava chart. Okay, and in this house system, the ascending degree will be the middle. Hold on a second. Let me just, I see Philip has arrived. Just give us a sec. Maybe you could just mute your mic for now, but feel free as we go along to unmute your mic and butt in if you've got a question, all right? Okay. Okay, so we're talking here about, you know, the very basic calculation settings and differences between typical Western and typical Vedic ways of locating the zodiac signs, and also the houses. And the thing is that I was saying now that there is this house system in Vedic astrology called the Bhava chart, which takes the ascending degree not as the beginning of the first house, but rather as the middle of the first house. And so basically, according to that approach, the first house would begin 15 degrees above the eastern horizon and go up to 15 degrees below the eastern horizon. And then in this approach, let's just use my tropical chart here as an example, because this, by the way, this house system would be unaffected by whichever zodiac you use. So basically, if my ascending degree is 12 degrees Scorpio, 30 degrees later would be 12 degrees Sagittarius, and then that would be the middle and not the beginning of the second house. Okay. And so you know, with Western equal house, with the Western equal house system, basically every house is exactly 30 degrees starting at the ascending degree. So this is it's interesting that there's some sort of overlap here between the Western equal house system and this Bhava chart, except that what the Western equal house system will take as the beginning of the house, this other Bhava chart house system takes as the middle of that house. And what is interesting also beyond that is that it views that middle point of the house as the most effective point, like the heart of that house. In fact, they call it the cusp, but they use the word cusp here in a different way. They're not using it in the way it's usually used in Western astrology to mark the border between one sign or house and the next. And in fact, even Robin Hand some time ago wrote a little booklet or some long article about the cusp. And in that, he actually raises the fact that there is a mistaken assumption that the cusp always means that border between the two. You know, the cusp might be somewhere else, and it might imply, as I'm describing here, actually the most potent point in a house rather than necessarily its beginning point. Okay. I won't digress too much here, but this Bhava chart house system is a sort of an alternative way of looking at house placement that I have on hand, that I sometimes invoke when I'm feeling a little unsure about whether or not I'm getting the right picture from the usual settings. And, you know, just to go back briefly to Katrina's question about, you know, do I find that these Vedic settings work better? You know, yeah, again, it's very rare, sometimes almost despite my own skepticism sometimes about it, or almost disbelief about it, the sidereal whole sign house system almost always gets it right as I see it. Okay, and so it's actually often not necessary to use this Bhava chart approach, but one situation in which I might decide to apply it is if in the sidereal chart, the ascendant is close to the cusp of two signs. Because you see, this is also a very important point. When you're looking at Vedic astrology charts and when you're calculating Vedic astrology charts, there's this million-dollar question every single time, which is, do I know the time of birth with enough certainty to be sure I have the right ascending sign? Because if you're not absolutely sure, then you could have two totally different charts. Because with the whole sign house system, you know, the whole of the ascending sign is the first house, the whole of the following sign is the second house, and so on. So the moment you've got an ascendant that is close to the cusp of two signs, you could, you know, sometimes with error of just a few minutes, It could be anything from 1 to 4 or 5 minutes of error, and you could have every planet in a different house. And this is something that if you're going to practice Vedic astrology, you will probably have to confront from time to time, that you're probably going to have to sit with these two different patterns and decide which one is correct. And the more fully you understand the rules of Vedic astrology, the more able you will be to compare and to come to a conclusion. But sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's difficult because both chart patterns could give you relatively similar narratives. You know, sometimes it's much more clear cut, but when it's not, that's when I might use that Baba chart. Okay. And perhaps as a little aside here, I'm kind of inviting you further down the line, perhaps to remind me to perhaps go maybe a little further down the line in this course, to give you an example of how I would confront this situation of when the ascendant in the sidereal chart is close to the cusp of two signs, and what kinds of questions I would ask, what things I would look for, which tools I would use to try and decipher it, because you know, there are certain timing tools like dashas for one, but also there's some other timing tools that can be very useful, and you know, that can enable you to ask a person, you know, what happened in this or that year of your life, and sometimes that can help you really hone in on it. And also the thing is, you know, when you are engaging in that exercise of trying to sort of rectify the ascendant, you don't just assume that you've got it right just because one thing fits. You want to see the chart validating itself in many, many ways, in many places. So it's not just a simple case of finding something that fits. You want to use that chart, which basically hardly ever fails. Okay. To act as one would have expected. All right, so now we get to the conventional chart format that Vedic astrology uses. Now there are two very commonly used chart formats. One is called the North Indian and one is called the South Indian. And in this course, we're going to focus on the North Indian. You will find that in the course manual, there is, I think, an adequate description of what the South Indian chart format looks like and how you would work with that. Because I firstly prefer the North Indian chart format, and I think slightly more widely used, I'm going to just focus on this format for now. And another reason is that although it might look radically different to the to Western chart, that it's actually more similar to Western charts than the South Indian, because in this case here, the ascendant, or first house rather, excuse me, although it's at the top here and not on the left-hand side as we find it in Western charts, it's always in the same place. Whereas with the South Indian chart, the ascendant is actually something that moves around. So it's a very different way of looking at a chart. There's another reason why I like the North Indian chart, because you will see that okay, firstly, you know, these numbers here are telling you where the houses are, right? So this big diamond in the top middle, that's always the first house. And then over here, this is always the second house, and so on, okay? But in this chart format, you'll see that the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses, you'll see that they have bigger blocks or diamonds, so to speak. And what that is doing is accentuating those houses. Those are the houses where things come out very clearly. So there's also this simple sort of visual benefit here in helping you identify the main houses. They sometimes in Vedic astrology will refer to this as the center of the chart. And things that are in the center of the chart are things that step forward very strongly. We'll go into these house groupings in a bit. I remember when I went to India for the first time, after having studied Vedic astrology for some years already, I had some consultations done with various Indian astrologers. I hadn't even, I think, consulted astrologer ever before that. I remember the first time I went to see an astrologer, I went with some young Indian guy who was really just a translator, because the Indian astrologer we were consulting, it was quite an old guy, was literally sitting on his bed, and we were sitting on chairs on the side. And this guy who was the translator, well, since we were there, he had his chart done too. I remember that Indian astrologer said to him, "You've got nothing in the center of your chart." And I don't know what word he used exactly, but basically what he told the guy is, because you've got no planets in the center of your chart, you're not likely to amount to much. What the implication is that when planets are in these angular houses, they step forward. And if you've got absolutely no planets there, it means that, it doesn't mean you don't have a good life, but you won't have a visible life. You're not likely to be particularly famous or make a big impact. You know, you could potentially be, you know, it won't inevitably mean that you're going to be some reclusive yogi, but as an example, you might be some person who has a relatively introspective or hidden life, but it could be a very blissful life, you know, for all we know. So it's not an affliction not to have things in those houses, but people who've got planets in the angular houses are more able to kind of, like I said, make an impact on the world and sort of wield. They can more easily make an impact on the world, because they can wield these energies in a very empowered way. Okay. All right. So now it's a very simple, you know, when you look at Vedic charts, sometimes they can, you know, in their, should we call them native sort of presentation or format, you can sometimes feel like just there's not much there. It can seem so simple that you wonder what's, you know, is there anything going on there? And it's because it leaves it to you. How can I say it? It assumes that you have a lot of insight and knowledge about certain things that are not made as graphic, therefore not made as graphic for you as it would be in the Western charts. So basically, because Vedic astrology uses the whole sign house system, whichever sign you have as your rising sign will be in the first house. There's no need to draw in house cusps or what have you, because basically it's that whole sign. So if we go back for a moment to this on the right hand side here, my sort of Western style sidereal whole sign chart, you can see that the ascendant is Libra, right? You can see that Mercury is also in Libra and in the first house. So, you know, if we were going to draw that in here, basically, this is not actually how they would do it in India. They wouldn't use the glyph for Libra, but I'm just doing this to give you some anchor onto this. So basically, the first house would be Libra, and any planet in Libra would be in the first house. And in my case, that would be Mercury. And then, you know, it would just follow from there. You could literally insert the zodiac signs in the appropriate houses. And I know that Charmaine was asking about how you would calculate the Vedic chart in Solar Fire. And this is not a bad place to mention that, okay? because you'll see that although, like I said, this is not the conventional way it would be drawn in India, you know, they wouldn't normally use planetary glyphs and the glyphs that we use for the zodiac signs, but it has become more common. And when you look at the way Solarfire does draws the Vedic North Indian charts, it in fact liberally uses the zodiac signs in this way. And as we're going to see in a moment now, you know, I've put these numbers in here to give you an initial anchor into, you know, where each of the houses are. But in Vedic charts, they assume you know that this is the first house at the top here. And so usually that if there's a number there, that number is not telling you that that's that numbered house. In fact, they would put a number 7. There wouldn't be a number 1 there. There would be a number 7 to mean Libra. Okay. I think that at this particular juncture, I'm going to open Solarfire and address Charmaine's question. All right. I'm assuming that what you are seeing here is the, you know, is Solarfire's, you know, basic sort of interface. And you will see here that my chart is there in the calculated charts, and it is currently, you'll see it on the right there, you can see it's tropical Placidus, okay, as the you know, usual conventional default approach. Now, there's more than one way you can go about this, but remember that you want to, however you do it, there are 2 important settings that have to change now. Firstly, you've got to change the tropical zodiac to the sidereal zodiac. And secondly, you've got to change the Placidus house system to the whole sun house system. And you'll see that at the top here, you see there's a little Tropsid button in Solarfire, which basically enables you to toggle between the tropical and sidereal zodiac. And in my, I've set it up so that when I click on that, right, it selects the Lahiri Ayin Namsha and automatically converts it to the whole sun house system. Now, if you have not set it up in that way, you could right click there and go to edit chart. Okay, so you can see that on the right here, we've got house system and zodiac, right? So with Placidus, it's currently Placidus, we would go down to, we would find whole signs, okay? And then for zodiac, you see, we've got Fagin Allen is also a sidereal setting, but we'll choose Lahiri, okay? So once we've done that, great. Now we've got the chart in the Lahiri zodiac whole sun houses. Now the next thing you do is go to pages here on the right, click on that, and it open a little window, and you'll have right at the bottom an option that says Vedic. And then you will see that there's both the option for South Indian and North Indian. So you click on the first one, Dash's book, he's North Indian, and you should now be seeing the chart in Solarfire, and you should be seeing it in the North Indian chart format, right? There's nothing more important in the beginning than making sure you all have the tools that you need to do this conversion, however you do it, whether it's manually or whatever software you're using and so on. Okay, as you can see, as I was saying earlier, that, you know, can you see there's no number here in that first house, right? You can see it's very small there, but there's the glyph for Libra. So this should actually make those a little bit bigger. It's telling us the ascending degree here, and then they assume you know that that's the second house, and that you know that this is the third house, and this is the fourth house, and so on. Okay. Okay, so now what I want in this slide, what I want you to see as the sort of, let's call them training wheels, right? Assuming, for example, a person does not yet have have it anchored in their minds which little blocks and triangles are which house. And so then I've written the name of the zodiac sign in that house. Okay. And then the planets that might be in those houses. But now you see what we find at the bottom is how this chart at the bottom is how you would probably find it if you were using proper Vedic astrology software. And you would see that this number 5 would be, they would assume that you understand that this is the first house, and this number 5 is for Leo, the 5th sign, right? And that number 6 is then for Virgo, and so on. So it can it can be quite it takes initially some mental gymnastics to get used to this way of looking at a chart, but it's good to train yourself to do that as soon as you can. You know, as I said, if you're just starting out and you're finding your feet, by all means use even a Western wheel chart, just making sure you're using the Lahiri Sidereal Zodiac and the whole sign houses, and fine, at least you know which planets and signs are where. But this chart at the bottom is how you're going to find it with Vedic software more often than not, or in Vedic astrology books, particularly those that might be written by Indian authors and so on.